storm hit without warning, a sudden fury of snow and wind that swallowed the woods in an instant. Kelly had been walking along the creek when the first flakes began to fall, but now the world around her was nothing but a blur of white. The beam of her flashlight cut through the swirling snow as she tried to make her way forward, hoping to find shelter. The sound of rushing water reached her ears, a steady roar beneath the howling wind. She followed the creek's path, her boots crunching in the snow when she saw it, a figure crouched near the water's edge. At first, Kelly thought it was just a shadow cast by the storm, but then it moved. The creature was tall and emaciated, its limbs unnaturally long, like the twisted branches of the trees surrounding the creek. Its skin was as pale as moonlight, stretched tightly over its bones. It crouched on all fours, its claws digging into the frozen earth. The creature's head turned slowly toward her, what happened, and Kelly froze in place, her breath catching in her throat. Its face was wrong. Smooth, featureless skin stretched over its skull with no eyes, no nose, just a wide, twisted mouth that curved unnaturally into a grin. A low, guttural sound escaped its throat, like the sound of something drowning, yet alive. Kelly's instincts screamed at her to run, but her legs wouldn't move. The creature tilted its head as if studying her, and then it made a sound, like a dry, rattling laugh. Before she could react, the ground shifted beneath her feet. The creature's limbs stretched out, and with a terrifying speed, it lunged. Kelly spun around and fled, her feet slipping on the snow as she ran. Behind her, she could hear the creature's jagged breathing, its claws scraping the ice, getting closer and closer. She didn't stop until she reached the road, heart pounding in her chest. With trembling hands, she fumbled for her car keys, desperate to escape. The snowstorm blurred her vision, but as she slammed the door shut and locked it, she saw it, standing just outside her headlights, its grin wide and mocking. It raised a long, clawed hand and pointed at her. The creature melted back into the storm, but Kelly couldn't shake the feeling that it was still watching. She started the car, sped away, and never looked back. Weeks later, when the snow finally thawed, strange marks were found in the snow near the creek. Grooves in the ice, like something had crawled out from beneath the water, dragging something or someone with it. Returned to the creek for weeks after the storm. Every night, the image of the creature's grin haunted her dreams. She tried to forget, telling herself it was a trick of the storm, the wind playing with shadows. But the marks in the snow, the way it had pointed at her, gnawed at her. She couldn't shake the feeling that it was waiting, watching from the edges of the woods. One afternoon, unable to resist any longer, Kelly drove back to the creek. The storm had passed, leaving behind a barren, quiet landscape. The air felt thin, like the earth itself was holding its breath. She parked at the same spot where she had fled weeks earlier, her heart racing despite the calm. The creek was still there, but something was off. The water was eerily still, its surface unnaturally smooth, like a mirror reflecting the gray sky. As Kelly walked closer, she noticed the ice had split open in places, the cracks forming strange, jagged patterns. It looked as if something had tried to climb out or been dragged in. Kelly's breath caught in her throat as she stepped closer to the water's edge. That's when she heard it, a soft rustling behind her, like the wind shifting through the trees. She spun around, her flashlight cutting through the gloom. For a moment, she saw nothing but the dark expanse of trees and snow. Then, a shape appeared. At first, it was barely visible, just a flicker of movement. But as her eyes adjusted, Kelly saw it clearly. The creature. It was crouched low to the ground, its long limbs twisted beneath it. The pale skin of its body shimmered in the faint light, and its hollow face turned slowly toward her. There were no eyes, just a smooth blank surface where a face should be, and that same twisted grin stretching wider than before. The creature's lips parted, revealing teeth that gleamed with unnatural sharpness. It made the same low, guttural sound, like something drowning. This time Kelly wasn't frozen. The primal instinct to run surged through her, and she turned and bolted, her legs moving faster than they ever had before. Behind her, the creature followed, its movements fluid and unnatural, like it was gliding through the snow. She could hear its breath, wet, ragged, closer, closer. Kelly didn't dare look back. She didn't stop running until she reached the road, the familiar sight of her car parked ahead. Her hands fumbled for the keys, her heart pounding in her ears. When she finally unlocked the door, she jumped inside, slamming it shut behind her. Her fingers shook as she started the engine. The snow was picking up again, thickening in the rearview mirror. She glanced back, half expecting to see the creature at her window, but there was nothing. The road behind her was empty, the trees swallowed by the storm. Relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. As she drove, she could feel the air in the car growing colder, the temperature dropping in a way that felt unnatural. Her breath fogged up the windshield, and in the corner of her eye she saw it. Just a flicker, a pale shape in the trees, moving fast. The creature was still out there, and it was following her. She didn't shake the sense of dread as she drove away from the creek. Her mind raced, heart pounding in her chest as the world outside the car grew darker and colder. The storm had intensified again, and the snow began to fall in thick, blinding sheets. She glanced nervously in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the creature's twisted form lurking just out of sight, but the road was empty. For a moment, she convinced herself that she was safe, that the worst was behind her. She tried to focus on the road, the headlights cutting through the snow, but the weight of the silence in the car was unbearable. She rolled down the window, hoping the cold air would clear her mind, but the moment the wind rushed in, she heard it, a soft scraping sound from somewhere behind her. Her heart lurched in her chest. She slammed her foot on the gas, but the sound followed, growing louder, more insistent. It was a scratching, like claws on metal, scraping against the roof of the car. Her eyes flicked to the rearview mirror again, but this time something caught her eye. A shadow. A figure just at the edge of the headlights. It was standing by the side of the road, its elongated limbs twitching in the snow. The creature. Kelly's breath caught in her throat as she sped up, the tires skidding on the icy road. The figure remained still, watching her. The sound on the roof grew louder, as though it was moving, keeping pace with her. Then, suddenly, a horrific crack echoed from above. The creature's claws punctured the metal. Panic surged through Kelly as she swerved, narrowly avoiding a tree, but the car's tires slid on the ice and she lost control. The car spun out, skidding off the road, and then everything went black. When Kelly regained consciousness, she was no longer in the car. The storm had swallowed her, and all she could hear was the creak, rushing at roaring, cold and alive. Her body ached, and the freezing snow burned against her skin. She tried to move, but something was holding her down. She looked up. The creature stood over her, its face now fully visible, the smooth, blank skin stretched over its skull. Its mouth was open wide, a grotesque, cavernous maw of teeth. Its hands, long and clawed, wrapped around her arms, pulling her toward the edge of the creek. Kelly struggled, but the creature's grip was iron. She could feel the cold water licking at her legs as it dragged her closer to the dark depths, the current pulling violently beneath the ice. The creature tilted its head, that twisted grin widening even further, its face gleaming like death in the pale light. A low, gurgling sound echoed from its throat, like the death rattle of something ancient. The creature leaned down, its lips brushing against her ear, and whispered, "You're mine now." The ground beneath her cracked open. The ice shattered with a deafening crack, and the cold, rushing water swallowed her whole. As she sank, the last thing Kelly saw was the creature's face, grinning down at her, its hollow eyes watching her drown in the dark. Then the world went silent. The next morning, search teams combed the area, finding only the abandoned car. The windshield shattered and streaked with something dark. The snow around the creek was disturbed, but there were no signs of Kelly, only deep, gnarled claw marks etched into the snow leading into the water. And the creek, as always, ran swiftly, its surface calm and untouched, hiding its secrets beneath.